Yes, you are.
They can hear me. Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody to the fourth session of the ITRC Community of Practice. I hope you all had a good week and are all doing well. Before we get going, as normal, I want to thank our co-sponsors. You can see the list there, including the American Public Health Association for their special offer of all the continuing education credits, and Jesse Kohler and the Campaign for Trauma-Informed Policy and Practice for hosting the webinars. And speaking of that, I cannot get my Zoom account to work today, so I'm going to be with you by a phone only, and Christy is going to be running the slides. So just bear with us on that. It's the technology is what it is. So Christy, next slide, please. The agenda today is we're going to zero in on the first foundational focus that's really going to be needed to build population level capacity for mental wellness and resilience for the climate emergency, and that is to build social connections across geographic, economic, and cultural boundaries in communities. The first couple of sessions we focused on why are we trying to do this kind of work? Why is it important to work at the community level to build mental wellness and resilience? How do you organize community coalitions? And how do those coalitions, how can they get started in communities? One way you heard last week was to start by helping residents begin to heal the traumas they experience, or you can start by helping to help them understand the systems effects to map out the cycles of trauma in their community and the assets that exist to deal with them. And so the rest of the sessions now are going to focus on each of the foundational areas that our research focused on or identified. And the presenters are going to be Howard Lawrence, coordinator of Abundant Community Edmonton with the City of Edmonton, Canada, and Daniel Holmesy, Executive Director of the City and County of San Francisco, California, Neighborhood Empowerment Network. And I'm really looking forward to both of them joining us. It's really fascinating work that they're doing. Next slide, please. Before we do that, before we hear from them, I'd like to just do what we always do to start a session, and that is to do a resilience pause. And this time we're going to focus on a different kind of resilience pause called tracking. And these are all from the community. This is from the community resilience model developed by the Trauma Resource Institute. We focus so far on breath-based resilience skills, on resourcing, which is identifying things that help you calm yourself, and grounding, standing on something solid. Today, we're going to focus on tracking, which is really about stabilizing your nervous system. And the basic premise is what we pay attention to grows. So when we pay attention to pleasant or neutral sensations in our body, we can calm our nervous system. And when you pay attention to unpleasant sensations in your body, you can end up activating your nervous system. So tracking helps us learn how to distinguish between sensations that activate well-being and those that activate distress. And by sensations, I mean warmth or coolness, tingling, trembling, even yawning, stomach gurgling, burping, or tension, pain, tightness, or relaxation and soothing feelings. And there's other sensations. So if you're willing, let's just practice tracking for a few moments, and we'll do it again later in the session today. But I just want to give you a sense of how to do this. So if you would, just if you're willing, take a moment just to find a little comfortable position. And now scan your body and pay attention to or notice what is happening within you at the present moment. And start at your feet and just scan your body upward all the way to your forehead, or vice versa, or start anywhere you want. and determine different areas of your body that feel pleasant or neutral, meaning you don't feel much, or unpleasant. Sort of scan your body for a second. And if you find yourself attracted to and paying attention to unpleasant sensations, tension, tightness, pain, too much warmth, see if you can deliberately shift your attention to places in your body that are pleasant or neutral, meaning you don't feel anything. See if you can shift your attention there. And if you are able to shift your attention to those pleasant or neutral areas without trying to change anything or any sense of something being good or bad or right or wrong, see what you notice inside yourself as you place your attention on those pleasant or neutral sensations. For example, it could be a shift in your body posture, change in breathing, muscle tension, where your mind is going, or even your skin color if you have enough time to do that. Or maybe there's no shift at all. So just notice, try to put your attention on those pleasant, neutral sensations, and then if you're willing, just notice any changes that might occur, anything's happening in your body posture, breath, muscle tension, etc. And then just keep tracking your sensations for just a few more minutes. Notice, if anything, what's happening within you, if anything. Then let's come back to the room. And if anybody has any comments on what that was like for you, you can share that in chat. Or Christy, let's go to the next page. And so let's now break up and do breakout rooms of 3 to 4 people. And if get a chance to talk among each other, and start off by in one word how you feel now in the present moment. And you can share what tracking was like for you, if that's part of it. What stood out for you about last week's sessions? And who you shared that information with, and any outcomes or questions that emerged. So I'm going to allow Jesse or Christy, I'm not sure who's doing it, to separate you folks and do everybody into breakout rooms, and we'll see you in 10 minutes.
Folks are heading into breakout rooms now. I put the questions again in the chat if it's helpful while you're in the breakout rooms. See you all back here soon.
Jesse, is that you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was in a breakout room for a second, but didn't say anything. So.
Yeah, I brought you back.
Great.
Daniel and Howard, first of all, how are you guys? It's great to see you.
Doing good. Just soaking in all the rain here in San Francisco. It's freaking awesome.
Yeah, thank God you got it.
Yeah, we got 5 feet of snow dropping in the Sierras right now. So kind of a big deal considering where we usually spend our early November hiding from smoke.
Right. Hi, Howard. This is Bob. My internet won't work, so I'm on the phone today, and they're moving my slides for me, so I won't be able to see you. And
Deborah,
how are
you're
you,
muted.
both of you? What's that?
Oh, it looks like Deborah's trying to speak, but is muted. No, we can't hear you.
You can't hear who? Me? Or
Deborah's,
Deborah.
sorry, Deborah's trying to, it looks like Deborah's trying to talk, but it's not unmuting.
Deborah, you should see a prompt on your screen that invites you to join breakout room 3. And Tamara, welcome. I will add you to a breakout room as well. We're just doing introductions.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. Good to see you. I feel like, Christy, you figured, oh, hold on. I'll pause the recording.
Well, welcome back, everyone. If you have any comments about anything that stood out from your conversation, please share it in chat, and we'll come back to that after the presentations by Howard and Daniel today. We'll have much more time to another breakout room than a large group discussion. Can you move to the next slide, Christy? But before we hear from Howard Lawrence, I want to just sort of talk about, again, sort of bring you up to speed on what we're doing and what we're going to focus on today. So here is the 6-step process that we laid out. Again, there's lots of ways to organize this, but we started off by step 1 a couple of weeks ago. How do you get organized and develop your mission, values, etc. Then step 2 was begin building community capacity. We talked about that last week, and there were 2 different options. And then step 3, I sent out a document. We're not going to dive into that much about how you develop goals, strategies, and action plans with logic methods, etc. So you have that document now. And now we're focused on that strategy that includes these 5 elements. And one is building social connections across boundaries. Next slide, Christy. So these are the 5 foundational areas that our research identified as really vital to build capacity, universal capacity for resilience and mental wellness for this long climate emergency. It's going to last decades. The first one, and you can hit the next slide, the next button down, it should just come up a little blue line around building social connections. That's what we're going to talk about today, but these are all interconnected. Next week, we're going to talk about ensure a just transition, and we'll define what that means by creating supportive physical, built, economic, and ecological conditions. Then we're going to focus on developing mental wellness and resilience literacy. Then we're going to focus on fostering engagement, getting residents engaged in practices that promote mental wellness and resilience. And the last session of the community practice will be focused on establishing ongoing opportunities for residents to heal the traumas that they experienced during the climate emergency and many others. So it's bringing it full circle. Next slide, please. So actually, yeah, so I'd just like to ask you all to sort of think about, when do you feel most happiest, most fulfilled, and most peaceful? Just think about that for a moment, and if you will, put some comments in chat if anybody's willing. When do you feel most happiest, filled, and peaceful? And let's go down one more, Christy. And then try to decide, how much does your happiness, fulfillment, and peacefulness depend on your connections to others? And put that in chat. A moment to think about that. When are you happiest, most fulfilled, and peaceful? And how much does that happiness and fulfillment and peacefulness depend on your connections with others? Christy, if anybody's put anything in chat, can you just read 1 or 2 real quickly?
Yes, we actually have a wonderful response, and I'm still seeing things pop up. Let me just scroll up to the top. Lots of people said, Reb said, waking up in the morning to feeling happiest, also feeling peaceful with my family. I'm seeing lots of themes of family, nature, being with loved ones, being with friends, and happiness, fulfillment, and peacefulness connected to others. Some folks said hanging out with a good friend, being with friends and family around the table, chatting outside. I'm seeing a lot of like connection to friends, family, and as well as nature.
Great. Thank you for that. And so I think the vast majority of us realize the connections we have with other people are vital. And that's the issue. That's the focus of today. Next slide, please. Please. Loneliness and social isolations are key drivers of mental health and psychosocial problems of all kinds. You can just scroll down now, Christy. Research meta-analysis, I think it was last year, found that loneliness and social isolation are really key drivers of anxiety, depression, PTSD, increased suicidality, and more, including addictions of all kinds. Next, just keep going down a little bit. And that's because lack of social connections and loneliness can lead to loss of self-worth, loss of a sense of meaning and purpose in life, both of which are essential human needs. One more down. And the social isolation and loneliness also inhibit, I've found they inhibit the immune system and promote inflammation, which aggravates the stress response and which makes loneliness and social isolation twice as harmful to both mental and physical health as something like obesity. And it also greatly increases the chance of early death, premature mortality. Next slide. Conversely, as I think you all experienced when you responded in chat, having social connections prevents mental health problems. It strengthens our physical health, and it increases our chance of longevity by at least 50%. Just scroll down a little bit. People who feel connected to others have a lower rate of anxiety and depression. They also tend to have much higher self-esteem and more empathy for others. And people who have good social connections, think about yourself, tend to be more trusting and cooperative, which makes other people more open and trusting and cooperative with them. One more down. So in other words, good social connectedness generates a positive feedback loop that enhances psychological, emotional, social, and physical wellness. Next slide, please. And at the same time, social connections are vital in disasters and emergencies. Just hit the first one down, Christy. Generally, in the first 5 or so days of a major disaster, your survival depends largely on friends, families, and neighbors, not emergency responders. There's not enough of them, and it takes some time to get organized and get out there, and they've got a lot to do. And social connections are key to helping people find ways to move to safe places, to obtain food, water, shelter, and other basic needs during and after a disaster. One down, Christy. Research on the 1995 Chicago extreme heat wave and last year's heat wave in the Pacific Northwest found that the people who were more apt to die were people who were socially isolated, often seniors or disabled people who lived alone, but even more than that. And the same dynamic applies to many other types of disasters. And there was new research by CREW, which stands for Communities Responding to Extreme Disasters, that I've worked with, and is really a good group. And I think actually, Howard, you sent this on to me also. They found that neighbors knowing neighbors is vital to maintain resilience for individuals during climate disasters. And you can get this research on there. Actually, we might post it on the website here. Next slide, please, Christy. So this is why building social connections is by far the most important foundational area Resilience Coordinating Coalition needs to focus on to build population mental wellness and resilience. Next slide. And all of the activities of a kind of a coalition these community groups should build social connections. Building social connections across boundaries in the community should be a standalone focus of a resilience coordinating coalition's work, but it should also be a central focus of each of the other 4 foundational areas. And we'll talk about that as we go through the next couple of weeks. Next slide, please. And there's 3 different types of social connections that the Resilience Coordinating Coalition should focus on. This is just one way to think about it. They're called bonding, bridging, and linking social support networks. Bonding social support networks are close connections with family and friends. These are called strong ties, often because these are the people you share deep emotional thoughts with, and you share your personal experiences with, etc. And they're vital. But just as importantly are bridging social support networks. And these are connections, bridges between your bonding, your 3 to 5 or 6 person family and friend social support network, and other family and friend social support networks in the community. They bridge the cultural, geographic, and other kinds of lines in the community. They're called weak ties because you're not sharing intimate details of your lives with these people. If they were, they would be part of your bonding social support networks, but they're just as important. And just as important as that are linking social support networks, and these are links between bonding and bridging networks and individuals and organizations in the community that have political power, economic power, or key resources, food, water, shelter, etc. Again, these are called weak ties because you're not sharing the intimate details of your lives with them, but you're sharing lots of, they're really important in any kind of adversity. So the bonding and bridging social support networks share information back and forth, share resources, help each other out, and then they're both linked to these external power bases, organizations, political folks who can provide critical resources during a disaster, or who can prevent a social injustice. For example, the local utility turning off power in a low-income area when power is short and leaving it on in a high-income area. It's when you have a connection linked to elected officials, a bonding and bridging network have those links. They can put the pressure on those to change it. So all 3 are very, very important during any kind of adversity. Next slide, please. So with that, I want to introduce to you Howard Lawrence, who's the coordinator of Abundant Community Edmonton with the City of Edmonton, Canada, who's going to share with you what Abundant Community Edmonton has developed, and his program has developed to address and build these kind of social support networks. And Howard, thank you very much for joining us. I wish I could see you again, but it's good to hear your voice, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Hi, everyone. Nice to be together with you. As Bob mentioned, those weak tie relationships, for these moments with both Daniel and myself, when you think of weak ties, think of the neighboring relationship. Those relationships with the people that live around you directly. So maybe the 6 to 8 people that live on your building floor, your cul-de-sac, or your block. So think about them right now and ask yourself the question, how well do I know them? And is my relationship with them weak tie? Do I know their name? Do I know anything about them? Would I recognize them? Most importantly, would I be there for them, or would they be there for me when we, if we need each other in the day-to-day of life? So we have given lots of thought to that in the city of Edmonton. We have delineated neighborhoods in Edmonton, which means we have human scales. So around 2,000, now think of this, 2,000 humans per neighborhood. That's about 1,000 households. And people know that they live in those neighborhoods. They are, as Emily Talon in her book Neighborhood says, they are delineated neighborhoods. We know when we arrive in them, we know when we leave them. They have a name, and we all agree that we live in those neighborhoods together. So They're delineated, but they're also activated neighborhoods. There's actually a leadership team and not a volunteer leadership team that gives direction to our neighborhoods. So this is important because from that standpoint, we enrich the neighborhood by saying we need to get to know one another, beginning, as it says here on the slide, at the block level. We are going to intentionally build connections because of the rich value of the neighbor to neighbor relationship. Here's some of the value: inclusion, health, care, safety. These are things that always matter to a municipality. So municipalities benefit by block level connection and then the connection of neighbors across the neighborhood. Two very different kinds of relationships. Those that live close by on your block, building floor, or cul-de-sac are more like an extended family. So it moves from that weak tie relationship to a stronger tie at the block level, but they're very important to our well-being. For many years, we have been tracking with Asset-Based Community Development Institute out of Northwestern University in Chicago, John McKnight, Jody Cressman, their framework for making neighborhoods healthy, focusing on what is strong in a neighborhood, what are the assets of a neighborhood, what are the assets of the human beings, the individuals, your neighbors, what are their assets, what do they bring to the neighborhood to strengthen the neighborhood. We often talk about how the neighbors in our neighborhoods work 9 to 5 with all kinds of skills, gifts, and experiences. We invite those neighbors to use those gifts, skills, and experiences in the 5 to 9 of life in the interests of the responsibilities of being a good neighbor. Asset-based community development is rich in that it focuses on the relationships of people, the strengths of the neighborhood, with a limited focus on the agency's contribution to your neighborhood. The agency's contribution to the neighborhood is great, but it is not the priority. The priority is citizen gifts and citizen gifts together. If I'm a singer and I come together with other neighbors who sing, then we are a choir. That is a strength to the neighborhood when we form groups in neighborhoods. So John and Jody, who wrote that book, Transforming Communities from the Inside Out, have worked with the city of Edmonton for 10 years to help us develop a framework for every neighborhood. So community development is not just the domain of troubled neighborhoods, for every neighborhood. So our vision is this, and this comes from our asset-based community development foundations. Neighbors connect at the block level, building floor, or cul-de-sac. That is primary. Then you see the second one, neighbors with like interests. So maybe I'm a social justice person, not just a singer or a sports player of some sort, a bike rider, a walker. We want to put those people together in the neighborhood. So we try to form affinity groups within proximity. Those are commonly known as friends. So can you imagine having friends in your small neighborhood that you do activities together with? So now you've got, and your experience as a neighbor is, I know my neighbors that live around me, and I have some people who I do activities with from across the neighborhood. Then my skills, gifts, and abilities and experiences are actually known and used by the neighborhood. All of this together strengthens the social fabric of our neighborhood. So in terms of our framework, the starting point is that block, and it's identifying somebody who will initiate on my block, building floor, or cul-de-sac. Maybe you're that kind of person. Maybe your mom or dad was that kind of person growing up, where they were the ones that brought people together, helped each other know each other, not as friends, but as neighbors. Again, back to Bob's weak tie notion, or Mark Granovetter's weak tie notion. The strength of that weak tie relationship is made real by someone who just connects us on our block or building floor. Very natural or organic to do this kind of thing. When I see a human being that lives around me, I put my hand out, I extend a welcome or an introduction to them. Then I might say something naturally, organically, like, hey, we should get together and have a coffee. Perhaps we should invite some of our other neighbors to have a coffee or a beverage or some kind of snack together. So they're the point person that introduces, they're the party person that convenes some kind of social. And then they lean in to just know a little bit about us. How many children do you have? Where are you from? What are you interested in? So a very organic process, but this is a must to initiate. And at the block level, in a neighborhood of 1,000 residents, 1,000 households, 2,000 residents, that means that we're going to need approximately 50 of those initiators. But because of the importance of this neighbor-to-neighbor relationship, it's worth the energy. So this is what a 13-year-old did, and my son, the 13-year-old did. He heard that we had seniors that were struggling on our block. This was Dave. Dave had fallen down the stairs. We're sitting around the table. Matthew, my 13-year-old, gets his computer out, creates these invitations, and then as a 13-year-old, distributes them to the 20 houses on our block that say simply this: potluck. When? Tomorrow. We're not waiting. September 17th. You don't have far to walk. This isn't a big plan. Bring any dish. Doesn't matter. We're going to eat together. Meeting at the Lawrence's house. Hang out and talk with your block from 6 to 7, an hour long. Let's just get it done. Building, strengthening those weak tie relationships. And we did this. It was hilarious. The neighbors came. It was a wonderful coup for my 13-year-old to actually experience the power of convening nearby neighbors. This is another party, and Danielle and I are both going to talk extensively about the importance of gathering people for this kind of block social. This is a block social. All kinds of concerns are dealt with in these things. So we've got active addictions and challenging addictions going on. We also had a whole group of moms that had not met each other. They all live in a 2-block radius from one another. And this was their first time that they had connected with all these little bambinos. And one had already put their child to bed. So can you imagine the richness of life that comes when you know all the other moms in the 2-block radius around you, or the other parents? We are, as the city of Edmonton, trying to bring awareness to the block, building floor, or cul-de-sac as a supportive social unit. We want people to think, do I have a block? Do I know my block? And ultimately, is my block awesome? What makes an awesome block? We share food, we share a cup of sugar, we know each other's names, we're there for one another, we play together. So in order to make this kind of thing happen, we need supportive people around this. So in the neighborhood, we are looking for a support team. So somebody that says, we believe in this idea and we will not let it die in this neighborhood. So we call that the support team. The support team works with that neighborhood leadership I mentioned, delineated neighborhoods that are activated by leadership. Someone who's actually got a hand on the wheel of this neighborhood, giving it direction and giving it hopefully the right direction. That's your neighborhood leadership that are worked with. And then together, those red block connectors, right? You got to keep in mind, there are 50 of those ideally in a human scale neighborhood. A delineated and activated neighborhood would have 50 block connectors. And you may actually even hire or appoint a neighborhood connector to identify and maintain those 50 blocks. So there's the support team, they're key. They report to leadership. They just celebrate neighboring in your neighborhood, both at the whole neighborhood level, right? Those affinity groups within the proximity of the neighborhood, the biking group, the moms group, the youth group. But they also help to celebrate the block level connections, the awesome blocks of the neighborhood. The neighborhood connector ventures out throughout the neighborhood, checking in on blocks, saying, do you have a point person? Do you have a block connector on your block? How can I help this move along? Oh, you need help with your block party. Oh, you need help with introductions. I'm the one to help you with those things. That person reports to neighborhood leadership as well. Here's a neighborhood connector, and the map of the neighborhood is their stock and trade. So they will have a map of the neighborhood. They'll have yellow stickies like you see here with names on it. They will pay attention to how each block is doing. Oftentimes they'll pay attention by knowing, is there a contact list for the block? Is the block having block socials? And then what other kinds of things are going on in the block, like a WhatsApp app to keep people connected. They'll also help them with resources. So there's a how-to book on how to be a block connector. There's also a contact list card. There's even, as you see on the left side of the screen, kind of a script to introduce yourself if you need to your first time neighbor. Hi, my name is Howard. I live nearby at, here's my email, here's my phone number. And then note, our next block social is next Friday. Let's get together. A 13-year-old can do this, right? And I will be, and you kind of blame it on the neighborhood. My neighborhood is asked if I would be our point person, party person, and listener. And this is some of the stuff that people put on the back of these cards. You collect this information over time, but it's fun to learn the richness of the residents that live around you. It will astound you who lives in your neighborhood. So how do we measure? Some of the ways of measuring success. We know that welcome and inclusion, child rearing, safety and security, disaster preparedness, isolation and mental health issues are all remediated, as Bob said, by this weak tie relationship, the valuable relationship of neighbors knowing neighbors. So you can test it through the sense of community index, Macmillan, Chavez. It's well known since 1986. You can use this as a municipality or as an agency, municipality preferably as an agency or as a neighborhood themselves to just test where your sense of community is. At the block level, basically you're really trying to find out down here on this block score, how many times a month do you wave or greet your neighbors? This creates a neighborly vibe. Are neighbors actually greeting one another? So if you live in a building, do neighbors actually greet one another or do they avert gaze? It's an important question. How many of the names of your neighbors do you know, those 20 closest neighbors? Now, weak tie relationships don't speak to needing to know the names of people further afield from your block, building floor, or cul-de-sac, but certainly those that live in your immediate area, which are more like that extended family, you probably should know their names. On average, how many neighbors attend your block socials? It doesn't matter that everybody does, but you should have a growing number of people attending your block socials. And you ought to have, and particularly when we're thinking of disaster preparedness or resilience, you really should have a contact list for your block, building floor, or cul-de-sac. So that is what we do here in Edmonton. Again, as Bob mentioned, Abundant Community Edmonton. We have a website. You can go on, you can see our resources and a little bit of what we do. There's some videos and whatnot on that site. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to share what we're up to here in Edmonton.
Thank you so much, Howard. As usual, wonderful presentation and such incredibly wonderful and exciting work. If anybody has questions now, place them in chat, and then Christy will read a few questions. We only have a few minutes, but I'm going to start off with just one question while people are putting their questions in chat. Howard, I'd like to ask you if there's many people on the line now. They're from all over the U.S., Canada, there's some in the EU. How could they get started on organizing this kind of initiative? What would be the first couple of steps you would recommend to them?
Yeah, great question. And the best thing to do is to really look at your own neighborhood and in particular your own block, and begin this research and development. Begin with research and development. Start on your own block and see how it goes. What is your experience like of connecting with your neighbors? Now, while you're experiencing this yourself, you can read the research. So I just gave you our site, but you know, Bob, you've mentioned some other sites as well in terms of building block level connections or building your neighborhood. And certainly our resources are available to you, but there's others as well. So you kind of set up an action, reflection, action, reflection framework. And then if you can, so you're doing this on your own block, you're reading about it. John McKnight and Cormac Russell just introduced a new book called Community, I think. Fabulous book that can be part of that reflection, teach you about what this work is. You're welcome to use our site. And then you're practicing and then reflecting and practicing. And then over time, you're talking to other people in your neighborhood from other blocks, get them to experiment as well and go from there. And then of course, you know, you can move toward your municipal leadership. The not-for-profit sector has some areas, but we really love it when we engage with municipal leadership and let them know what's going on at the block level.
Awesome, thank you.
very much.
And we
Krista,
do
can you
have
read it,
one
please?
question in chat, yes. We have someone asking, is there a feedback mechanism to the city to meet greater needs?
To meet greater needs. I think what that means, it would be issues that are the intractable issues of, let's say homelessness or safety and security. When we empower neighborhoods, blocks and neighborhoods to take responsibility for themselves, and then ultimately, like a family, begin to reach out beyond the neighborhood or beyond the family to meeting other needs, we actually are engaging a whole mechanism to meet some of society's most dire issues. Safety and security, we know that Robert Sampson has said, is really within the domain of neighbors, caring for neighbors. It's called collective efficacy. You look out for each other, enhancing both safety and security in the neighborhood, and a sense, maybe more importantly, a sense of safety and security. When a senior knows that they don't live alone, but they live actually with neighbors around them, their increased sense of security is so good for their mental health. But fundamentally, they actually are safer by knowing the neighbors that live around them. And then when we think of other large issues like homelessness, every neighborhood has the responsibility to welcome in individuals, working together with services that exist in your municipality to have wraparound services for vulnerable people in every neighborhood in your municipality, not a concentration in just certain neighborhoods, but really we want to have welcome in every neighborhood, not just for the well-being of those that need a welcome, but for the diversity and inclusion that comes to your own neighborhood, this diversity that you begin to experience as neighborhoods, which is just the way humans flourish, is in and with diversity. I hope that answers that.
I think so, thank you. And we have one more question from, we have two more questions. Becky is asking about your funding and who funds this effort.
Yeah, so ultimately the neighborhoods, each of those human scale neighborhoods receive funding from our municipality in the form of a small grant. It's not a ton, but it's certainly enough for their not-for-profit organization that acts as the leadership of the neighborhood. Now, we've had 100 years of this kind of a framework, so many of our city services conform to that basic neighborhood structure. So city services come packaged up for neighborhoods. So each neighborhood, we would share a community development leader, community development, somebody with community development expertise, and come in to coach. Obviously, that's an expense that's paid by the city. So varieties of expenses that come to serve the neighborhood are paid for by the city.
Thank you. And one more question I'm seeing from Lisa. Have you noticed if this approach has addressed pre-existing biases individuals may have towards their neighbors?
Yes. So this is the inclusion, welcome and inclusion. When you meet neighbors who are on your block in all of their diversity, and openness to diversity is fundamental. I mentioned Emily Talon's book, talking about the delineated and activated neighborhoods. One of the qualities of a healthy neighborhood would be openness or inclusion, or at least openness to inclusion. So that is a pre-existing condition that we need to create in all of our neighborhoods, inclusion or openness to inclusion. And if you think about it, once we begin to meet people who are different than ourselves and we see them as human beings and as our neighbors, we begin to really access our empathetic parts of our being. So absolutely, this is a wonderful way to create a harmonious and inclusive society.
Thank you, Howard.
Oh, and Bob, we did
yeah,
get one more question pop up if we want to do that now or save it
Got to
for
be
later.
very quick, though. Got to be
Okay.
very quick.
I think this is quick. Who is doing the measuring? You mentioned doing some.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
municipality does the measuring. We do the measuring.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank
Go
you
ahead,
again,
Bob.
and I want to encourage everybody to look at the website, the Abundant Community Edmonton website. There's much more information there, and we will post a bunch of it on the Basecamp site for the community practice. So, Howard, thank you so much for taking the time to make this presentation, and thank you for all the wonderful work you and the whole program are doing up there. Christy, let's go to the resilience pause slide, and let's just everyone take a second to sort of just digest what we just heard from Howard, and maybe do some tracking. Just sort of scan your body very gently, just to try to identify areas that feel pleasant or neutral or painful, unpleasant, and you find a place that feels unpleasant, shift your attention back to a place that feels pleasant or neutral. And as you do that, just observe whatever's happening in your body in terms of your breath or your way you're sitting, your muscle tension. Just observe without trying to change anything. There's no right or wrong, etc. Let's just take a moment to do that. And think about if you can do tracking, and if this is helpful or beneficial to you in some ways, what would it be like if everybody in your community learned tracking as well as the other simple self-administrable resilience skills we've talked about so far and we'll go more into. So and you can do tracking all the time, anytime you want to. So it's just something to think about. Christy, go to the next slide. So now that you've sort of settled in a bit, just give some thought about, is there a way you can replicate in some form, your own unique, culturally and demographically appropriate way, the abundant community approach in your community, in your neighborhood, in your organization even, getting people to meet each other. That is neighbor to neighbor connections, trying to create those strong and weak ties. And think about that. We're going to have a chance to come back and talk about that when we get into the next breakout room. But before we do that, let's go to the next slide. A slightly different approach, but just as exciting to me, and I think to the people in San Francisco, is the approach run by the Neighborhood Empowerment Network in the city of San Francisco. And I'm very honored to have Daniel Holmesy with us today, the director of the NEN, to share what they're doing down there. So thank you, Daniel, for joining us, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. I'm going to share a screen right now. So 1 second, please. Here we go. Can everyone see that? Affirmative. Yes, that's all the thumbs. All right, everyone. Good morning from rainy San Francisco, which is my favorite sentence. And if you have any idea of the catastrophically horrible impact climate change has had on California in the last 5 years, the hundreds of lives we lost, total local economies destroyed. Rain is the ultimate gift. And so I just want to let you all know how happy we are honestly today to actually have 24 hours of rain today in a row. So 5 feet of snow in the Sierras. So pack up your skis, come to California, spend your money. We need the cash. Okay, enough of my placement ad there. What are we doing here in San Francisco? Well, Howard actually touched on a lot of the fundamentals of what we're doing. I'm going to offer a little different layer to this, right? Conversation today. So let's jump in and then I think you'll see it. Ready? So let's talk about why we're here. I did mention climate change. Yep. Fire and water. Everything on this planet has to do with fire or water. Right now, in balance, these are wonderful attributes to our civilization. In out of balance, it's the way to end our civilization. Here's the current heat trends across this planet. Not looking good at all and only going to get worse. This is what it's like when you live in a neighborhood in Australia and you're heading to work in the morning. This is what it's like when you go on vacation to Greece and you're trying to sip your beautiful glass of Retsina. And this is what it's like when you go on vacation in Venice, Italy. And this is what it's like when you put your parents in an assisted living center in upstate New York and a hurricane strikes and they are unable to evacuate in a timely manner. And all the residents are left behind to shelter in place in 4 feet of water saturated with human sewage. So don't need to tell you that this situation here is outrageous. And yet we see it over and over and over and over and over again on the news. Every time something happens that is large and regional in scale, that quickly overloads our emergency management community, which is doing its best to support those they can, the harm and suffering is across the board. And many would argue, amplifies existing traumas and creates new traumas for these populations. So what are we doing about it? Well, in San Francisco, and this is a very truncated version of my presentation, there's much larger ones online if you want, or I can share them with Bob and you can see the end to end. So I'm going to chunk some pieces out. We did go down to Katrina, down to New Orleans and partner with Harvard to understand, what we could learn from what happened in Katrina and prevent something like that happening in San Francisco. And we learned a little bit about what we call the resilience model. So every day there's this resilient condition for a neighborhood, right? People are employed, people are mentally happy, people have transportation, people have access to education, retail, basically the community's in a healthy condition. Then some kind of shock comes along, right? Now, the reality is that most neighborhoods, are hovering around this condition on a regular basis. Certainly, they have their ups and downs. Every community does, but generally they're pretty stable. And as you can see, this community was doing really well right when the shock struck. Now, whenever there's a shock, I don't care if you're driving a car or walking down the street or whatever. When you get some kind of incident happens, you're going to stumble, right? But what matters is how quickly you stop stumbling and pivot and work to recover back to your existing or better condition. Obviously, this green community is in pretty good shape. But what we found in communities, and this was a lot of the analysis that came out of New Orleans, you would say the Garden District as opposed to the Ninth Ward, the communities that were struggling pre-pandemic, even to maintain a standing baseline of healthiness, unfortunately, whatever trends are in place before the disaster accelerate. And in this case, this community was already on a downward track, and it just kept going, right? It takes, not only does the impact go much deeper, but it actually takes a lot longer to start the recovery process. And the arc of the recovery is long and takes a long time to achieve. And ultimately, the community may never achieve a recovered condition. And so obviously, what we call this is the resilience gap. And the program that we run is to shrink this gap so every community has the capacity to perform in the same way pre and post event, because we believe everyone deserves to live in a happy, safe, connected community. So how do we achieve this condition? Well, Harvard came into City Hall and decided to give this big presentation, and everyone ran in. They wanted to, hear what Harvard had to say, and they were kind of shocked that Harvard actually wanted to talk about community development. And so they said, you need to invest today in capable local leadership that can drive rapid and substantive action. We need to focus on inclusiveness and embrace self-reliance, be able to evolve and adapt as challenges arise by developing new skills and capacities, and increase their capacity to seek out and interface success with outside sources of help, not just government, but foundations, universities, corporations, and NGOs. In other words, really how to build high-performing cross-sector partnerships. So what the NEN is a massive cross-sector partnership. We're this cohort of organizations. In the upper left, you have our foundations and our nonprofits and our the folks that work every day in our communities. To the right is government. To the bottom left are some of our private sector partners that contribute to this work. And in the bottom right are our academic partners. And that's one thing I just want to encourage everyone on this call is, your local universities are an immense resource for this work. The students are motivated. The teachers often care deeply about this. And if you're not tapping into the service learning or engaged learning programs that your local university contribute to this work, you're leaving a lot of resources on the table that maybe you so desperately need. What's our approach? We plan with people, not for them. And that's a big part of our programming. All of our systems are human-centered design driven exercises. And so we go into communities and facilitate a conversation. And then the result of that conversation is crafting a plan with strategies and concepts that will advance their resilience in an equitable local manner. We also design with people, not for them. So many of the programs, in fact, all the programs that we offer within the Neighborhood Empowerment Network, all of them were created by neighborhoods for their neighborhoods. And so when anyone ever comes to us and says, what program should we run? We're like, well, here's a great program. And they're like, well, what consultant did you hire to create this? I'm like, we didn't hire a consultant. The neighborhood across the street actually created it. So if you want to learn more about it, you can talk to them and find out firsthand if it works or not. Everything we build has to be scalable, duplicatable, and sustainable. So we can't have one program that works in one neighborhood. We need to have a program that works in every neighborhood. And I'll talk more about why that's critical moving forward. We need to offer real value to stakeholder organizations from all sectors at all levels. The bottom line is this work isn't about a workshop or a block party. This work is about a network that's up and running, that has robust participation and is applying constant investment into advancing its resilience forever. Resilience has no goal line. It certainly has its water stations. Every once in a while, something comes along, you pause and you focus and you move on. But the bottom line is the work of resilience never stops. And these programs need to retain participation from all these sectors forever. Lastly, our goal is to drive ownership at the neighborhood level through transfer of power. And that's one thing I think government has realized in the most recent years is we did a really great job of convincing folks, hey, if you pay your taxes, we'll take the money and pretty much do everything for you. And all you have to do is sort of hang out in your house and things will be great. Well, now we realize that a lot of communities transition way too much power of their resilience to the government and now are reclaiming it. And it's for everyone's benefit, including us, that communities take an active role in their resilience. So what do? Well, we set up what we call hubs in neighborhoods, right? Hubs are high-performing cross-sector networks that are comprised of CBOs, nonprofits, small businesses, academic institutions, networks such as civic networks like neighborhood associations or social networks. All of them come together and plug into this massive network that covers a neighborhood. And per Bob's earlier point, our neighborhoods in San Francisco scale between 8,000 and 12,000 people. And are comprised of multiple merchant corridors and a lot of different resources that they connect into. Community stakeholder onboarding method. If somebody's asking, how do you do this? Well, the first thing we do is we actually focus on doing our work at the hyper-local bottom-up approach. So what we do is we bring in a group of neighborhood leaders that we know are civically active in their community. They can be active around any issue. It could be family services. It could be economic development. It could be land use, transportation, education. It doesn't really matter. We know who these folks are. They care about this community. They're the stewards of the community. So we bring them together and we conduct an asset mapping exercise. We say on the left, what organizations control the mission critical resources you might need during a disaster? On the right, we say, well, what organizations provide services to these vulnerable populations? Once we create this list with the community, and this is an actual neighborhood in San Francisco, the Sunset neighborhood here in the city. Once we create that list, we map it. So this is the West Portal neighborhood. And so all the organizations they identified that they want to be plugged into their network, they actually put on a map so we can see visually what the boundaries are of the neighborhood and where these locations are located, where the organizations are located. Then we do human-centered design exercises. So we reach out to everyone, bring them into the room. We use asset-based organizing approaches. So we tell them that the supervisor's office is on board, the neighbor association's office on board, everybody is on board, so you should come on board. We bring folks together and we actually do tabletop exercises to help them learn about each other's goals and aspirations, and ultimately identify their goals and objectives for how to prepare for times of stress and in an equitable and inclusive manner. Then we focus on facilitated leadership. So when you come to our meetings, the residents lead our meetings. All of the programming we do is with the concept of leadership development, as Harvard sort of indicated was our goal objectives. So we offer experiential leadership development. So in the course of moving from a neighborhood steward to a hub leader, along the way, we train them on the baseline techniques for facilitative leadership and human-centered design and other skills and resources, ultimately positioned to be high-performing cross-sector network leaders. Then on top of that, we actually offer a formal leadership program that people can plug into via Northern California Coro. And then we, again, I want to point back, use asset-based organizing. And so what we do is we bring the people together, and by linking together technical assets, programmatic assets, political assets, financial assets, all those things, and putting them on the table, that's how you get people in the room. I think people are kind of tired of being invited to meetings and talking about the way the world should be, and there's really no resources there for them to leverage to actually act on any other ideas or concepts. And that's why we provide a very rich footprint of all those resources. So when they come together and they have great concepts or things they want to achieve, we have the resources in the room for them to move forward. And then that, I think, creates the environment for them to want to continue to participate. In this model right here, pre-event, you can see how the hub network looks. We have the anchor institution in the middle. It could be a church, a nonprofit, a neighborhood association. The outer ring are the hub member organizations. These are the organizations that can, on a daily basis, work with residents in the community. And then the outer ring are our block champions. And this points to our Neighbor Fest block party program, which I'll talk more about. But as you can see in this model, what we try and do is create a program that starts at the very highest level of the neighborhood and works all the way down to the block level. And the reason why is under many conditions, especially like, for example, the recent pandemic, or even inevitably, potentially a massive earthquake, you're going to need the CBOs to be connected with our neighborhood team leads in order to make sure that they have the highest level of interoperability, because CBOs really are the backbone of our response, as we see time and time again in our communities. What we do is we bring all those stakeholders together every year together around a neighborhood. Here's the Ocean Avenue neighborhood. And we actually have them participate in a tabletop exercise where they actually have to work as a team to identify where to set up a central shelter, how to help people shelter in place, how to do mass feeding in their community, and how to establish command posts. And in the construct of running these exercises and working in these different boxes, at the very bottom, you see where the gaps are. And the gaps is where they capture all the investments they need to make in order to achieve their response goals in the future. And those gaps get converted into goals and objectives and memorialized in the Resilient Action Plan. And the Resilient Action Plan guides the community's investments moving forward on mitigation, readiness, response, and recovery investments at the individual, organizational, and community level. During a disaster, the network actually activates in what we call something called a NEOC, the Neighborhood Emergency Operations Center. That center reaches out and connects with all the CBOs, faith-based organizations, and networks that are activating and makes them part of their network. At the block level, we have something called the Block Support Center that repurposes the relationships established during the Neighbor Fest and actually takes the host committee and turns them around and actually has them help people shelter in place during a disaster. I touched on this earlier, and Howard mentioned this as well. Here's our program. We call it Neighbor Fest. Neighbor Fest is basically how to throw the world's greatest block party. And what we do in this model is we fuse together the fun and the popular activity of hosting a block party with really what we'd say classic emergency management goals. During the pandemic, we've been running this program for 6 years before the pandemic. We actually, after 6 months of response in June and July, we actually partnered with the University of San Francisco's Master of Public Health Administration program and actually conducted a detailed assessment where we interviewed the hosts of past block parties. And the big investment that, of course, we sold them on was the power of social connection. And what was really exciting was 100% of the hosts surveyed believed that the relationship building component of NeighborFest made it easier to identify the neighbors that either needed help or could help those around them as they sheltered in place during COVID-19. And that's just a remarkable data point. I've never seen an assessment with 100% identification of something as critical as this. And so clearly, as you can imagine now, we're even more fired up, and we're just wrapping up our NeighborFest season for 2022 this weekend. As we fast forward though, what have we learned? Well, here's the Sonoma County. Again, this is the Kincaid fire, which struck in 2019. You can see all the footprints of the fires that have occurred in Santa Rosa, compounding on top of each other. This area has been pounded and saturated with fires, massive evacuation, mandatory evacuation zones and voluntary evacuation zones. And as you can imagine, moving every vulnerable resident out of harm's way in a matter of minutes as a wildfire comes bearing down on their home can be incredibly difficult if you don't have connected neighbors helping each other. My mother was up in Cloverdale, California, and so my sister said, get up there and help her. So I packed up my block support center that I've set up for my block here in the city, bought a bunch of groceries, went up there, brought all my neighbors together, all my mother's neighbors together, brought in these light systems. They'd been sitting in the dark for days because PG&E had turned off the electricity and the natural gas. So they had no way to cook and no way to light their home. They had no phone service, nothing. Many of these people were living with chronic conditions and were electronic dependent. They either had Alzheimer's, dementia, or oxygen tanks that needed to be plugged in that they couldn't use. My mother, the young lady in the white sweater right there, pulled all her neighbors together. I went out front, whipped out the turkey deep fryer, cooked up a huge pot of stew, and made that dinner for everyone that night. And here you are, you can see them all enjoying their meals. Sadly, many of the people in this picture passed away during the pandemic, but you can really see the power of community and a good hot meal and how important it was to them after sitting in the dark for 3 days with no food or communication or care and shelter support from anybody due to the fact that the first responder community was overwhelmed with trying to support the other 300,000 people that evacuated. My mother, the next day, we teamed up and we set up her own block support center, set up our solar power generators to recharge their systems, created a tracking document so my mother and her neighbor would go out and check on the neighbors and track their conditions. And then my mother also became a hub to share information with her neighbors as the recovery process had begun. And I just want to elevate the importance of this because here's my mother, 85 years of age, and she's a first responder. So I want to be very clear that it doesn't matter how old you are, doesn't matter what your background is, what your identity is, what your preferences are. Everybody has the opportunity to contribute to this important mission. And I think that was very well displayed up there. Lastly, I just want to close it out with Latoya Cantrell, who was the community leader that we partnered with in New Orleans to help her rebuild the Broadmoor neighborhood. And today, of course, she's the mayor of New Orleans. So out of this work can come amazing things. And Mayor Latoya Cantrell came to San Francisco and met with us and did an interview with Felicia Thibodeau from our OMI community. And she basically gave us our marching orders, which is the cavalry is not coming. You are the cavalry. And that's really what I hope to share with you today. So thank you for your time.
Daniel, thank you so much for a great presentation as usual also, and all the incredible work you folks are doing down there. So again, put any questions you might have for Daniel in chat, and Christy can read them. But I'll start real quickly while those questions are coming out, Daniel, but the same question I asked to Howard. How could any suggestions for how people on the line can start something similar to the NEN in their community that might not be as big, might not have the kind of resources that the city of San Francisco has? Any suggestions as to how the first couple of steps they can take to get this kind of program moving?
Sure. Well, if you want to really activate at the block level, that's relatively easy. If you go to our website, neighborfest.org, you can download all the playbooks, all the tools, all the resources that will help you organize a block party and bring your neighbors together. I just want to offer some nuances to what we're learning, and we're all learning, but I just want to be very clear that, one thing we're finding about this work is that there are a lot of efforts to bring people together at the block level, but in a city like San Francisco, which has a very rich, diverse community on many different levels, economically, but also culturally, there are just some communities that don't really participate in sort of the classic meeting engagement model. And so block parties have seemed to be able to work across all communities and types of residents. And so the block party really has proven to be our most effective, if you will, convening platform, just because of how inclusive it is and easy it is just to walk out of your house and grab a bite and hang out and chat. And even if your English is not your primary language, you can usually negotiate through some of the baseline conversations and build relationships. The next level up, which is the Empowered Communities Program, which is about establishing the hub. You can find that program on our website too. And we actually have a white paper that was written by San Francisco State, which explains the methodology in detail. You probably actually have networks already up and running in your community that you would call a hub. They may be organized around different issues such as family services or transportation or economic development. So sometimes you don't need to start a whole network. You can actually take an existing network and then build on it and have them pivot and focus on resilience. But if you need to start from scratch, I mean, I constantly am sharing our maps and tools with people everywhere, all over the world. We've done this work in Vancouver. We've done this work in Mexico City and Christchurch, New Zealand. And so communities across the world, regardless of their language or disposition, really love the human-centered design aspect of building teams and leadership. I do want to put one thing out there for everyone to think about. So it's true, I do run the Neighbor Empowerment Network. We are hosted in the Department of Emergency Management now. We were moved over there after the pandemic because the assessment of how our programs performed during the pandemic proved quantitatively and qualitatively that the pre-event investment in social cohesion and connectivity, not only at the individual level, but at the organizational level, significantly reduced the harm of the pandemic on our most vulnerable neighborhoods. I want to be very clear that in our model, we actually realize that from an equity standpoint, we have to invest at the organizational level, and especially in communities that are socioeconomically disenfranchised. Block parties are, awesome, but what we have found in some communities is some communities lack the economic capacity to participate in block parties, and also they lack the connectivity at the block level to really pull a team together for a myriad of reasons. And so to some extent, we had to come up with a two-way approach in order to advance this critical role of mitigating the impact and harm on our vulnerable neighbors during disasters. And so what we found is that for large communities that every day struggle to achieve their resilience goals, these CBOs and faith-based organizations are their go-to networks. And so what we've done is now created a whole layer of our program where we are providing an opportunity to bring the CBOs and faith-based organizations and such together, have them build their connectivity and interoperability, but then go back into those organizations and increase their capacity to pivot during the disaster and be ready to handle the surge in demand that might come from their existing clientele base, but frankly, not be the mission that they had before. So for example, in the pandemic, while we were trying to figure out how to feed 1/3 of San Francisco centrally, a lot of the nonprofits that were doing workforce development, some of them I talked to, they actually pivoted and just started feeding their clients because they had no food, right? And so the reality is that the organizational work, as you saw in the hub model, by getting the key anchor institutions together and increasing their connectivity and interoperability, when we activate the disaster, people are sheltering in place, their neighbors are helping them. As soon as they run into a problem they can't solve, they can reach up into their local network where there's a higher aggregation of capacity at the CBOs and faith-based organizations to pivot and help them. Also, what we're building out is a new asset in our system called the community branch that's going to reach down and connect with those CBOs so they can share with us the unmet needs that they see in their community, either on site or in homes in the community. And then we can get better situation awareness and respond in a more equitable manner. In San Francisco, for example, we have a large population of Mayans, and we discovered this during the pandemic. And the Mayan community is a very complex community to work with, but critical because the fact that they're San Franciscans, everyone deserves to be supported. But their language and the way they collect and gather information is incredibly fascinating, but very different than normally our modality. So we didn't partner with this nonprofits that serve the Mayan community in the city. they would have been excluded entirely from our entire response and care and shelter approach. So I just want to put out there that, it's incredibly important to have a layered approach, and realizing in some communities, like a hyperlocal civic network block party model is great and is ideal for that. But in other communities that have historically experienced systemic racism and disenfranchisement, that lack those economic capacities to even come together and share food like that when they're struggling just to pay their rent every day, it's critical that you realize for them, they're going to lean on that CBO on the corner they go to every day for help. And so if we really want to have an equitable, resilient strategy, we need to invest in those organizations as much as we invest in anything else. So that's one opportunity that I share that we do, and happy to answer any other questions.
Great, thank you, Daniel. Christy, can you want to read a few questions?
No questions have come in yet, but oh, never mind. We have one from Philip. Are you finding that better connected neighborhoods are now proactively working together to take longer term actions, such as to get zero carbon emissions?
Well, honestly, right now, we're trying just to get through the pandemic in many of our communities. There are conversations right now going on around zero carbon emissions, and I want to be very clear. We work closely with the Department of Environment, Tyrone Jew. I actually just bought an induction range, so I'm doing my share of work. We do feel that peer-to-peer influence is critical. Our big focus right now, for example, is getting people to focus on not buying gas-powered generators for post-disaster, but buying solar-powered generators, as you saw. So, for example, that's one of the things we're trying to do, is introduce the power of lithium battery technology and its valuable use during disasters. Tragically, what we know is a lot of people die in disasters when they use gas-powered generators from carbon monoxide poisoning. And so this is another reason why we're like, don't go carbon, go solar. Right now, one of our neighborhoods, though, the Bayview community, just received the largest single community disaster resilience or community resilience grant in our history from a foundation, and they will be focusing on mitigating the impact of climate change on their residents, and pursuing a zero carbon footprint is a mitigation investment that people are interested in, and they are exploring. But the truth is, we do let communities self-identify what their priorities are. And right now, what we are seeing is the trauma and harm to our seniors and isolated individuals across the city is still strong and in place. And so our communities are working aggressively to address that trauma and harm. And they're also struggling to save their merchant corridors. And I'm sure you've all heard in San Francisco, the recovery has been complicated here. And there's been a ripple effect from the downtown all the way out to our merchant corridors, which are essential for many of our community members that have minimal transportation access to access food and medication services. So right now, they're all working to try and figure out how to maintain our retail footprint because of the fact that a lot of individuals that don't have access to the internet can't shop online at Safeway and need that local grocery store that they've been going to for years. And so right now, the work right now is trying to block and tackle and protect these valuable attributes. Pre-pandemic, the conversation around environment, climate change, and zero carbon emission was very, very prevalent. And I'm sure we'll get back to that. But for now, people can use these networks for whatever they feel are their priorities. And right now, what they want to do is continue to focus on the pandemic's impact and just make sure that we cease the harm that it is continuing to have on our communities.
Awesome. Thank you,
Howard.
Daniel. And Bob, we have one more question, also from Bob, another Bob. Do you have any ideas on how you can get this model going in rural areas where households are more distant from each other?
Sure. Well, that's, if anyone wants to look up Cloverdale, California, it's the most northern town in Sonoma County. It's in the center of a massive agricultural area. And I could come back and do a whole presentation on what has been going on in Cloverdale since the Kincaid fire. We actually teamed up with Professor Daniel Aldrich, who's actually one of the internationally recognized experts on the power of social cohesion and disaster resilience. And the truth is that this was an exciting opportunity we had to work with Cloverdale on exploring how can this model support rural communities. The reality is that there are just some physical challenges that rural communities create by design that they're aware of, right? And that is that when you have people residing in homes that often sit acres and acres apart from each other, they recognize that they're socially isolated and they have to be more independent. So they tend to be better prepared. They actually have ways to power their home. They have other ways to grow their own food, access their own water. And when they do need help, this is what we have found. So when you talk about, I mentioned earlier about how communities collapse on the local CBOs, that they receive services and benefits every day. Well, if you know anything about agrarian America, you know, the agrarian economy, what was going on was that, you know, the farmers would go into town on a regular basis for services and resources. I've even heard that's why we have our elections on Tuesday, was because farmers, that's the day the farmers were in town and that's the day they wanted to vote. So that goes all the way back to that. And the truth is that in the town of Cloverdale, it has always been a regional hub for the rural residents. During the Kincaid fire, when the fire came down over the hill and hit all the farms and the wineries in the area, over 700 migrant farm workers and their children showed up in the town of Cloverdale at the fairgrounds looking for care and shelter support. And so what we realized is that it's really, you can't really scale a house to house footprint in a rural community, but by design. But the reality is a lot of those residents are better prepared to shelter in place than anybody else we know. The flip side is we do know when they do need help, they collapse onto the civic infrastructure that they've always turned to. And these are these small towns. And we saw that up in that classic story about 9/11, when all the planes landed in that small town in Nova Scotia, right? I think from far away, I guess it was called, where they went from 2,000 to 22,000 people in 24 hours, right? But somehow they figured it out. So Cloverdale has now made this investment in this program called Resilient Cloverdale, where they've created this massive COAD, community organizations active in disasters. They've partnered with the local fairgrounds leadership, and now they've created a hyper-local care and shelter model with embedded caches of disaster supplies and resources and human resources, so that should 700 people show up again in the fairgrounds, they'll be ready to receive them and provide them culturally competent support. As a result of the research that we've done there, we're amplifying the support for the Latino community. And so now language translation is available in all aspects of the hyperlocal care and shelter model. And Cloverdale is really beginning to prove itself to be a best practice for towns and rural communities as well.
Great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I think that's all the time we have for questions. But I just want to thank you and Howard again for the great presentations, and for both of you and your programs, the wonderful work you're doing. I would encourage all the folks that are involved with the community practice to look online at Daniel's website and the NEN's website and for other information. And if you have questions that we don't get answered here, we're going to do a breakout room now. We can actually then send them on to both Howard and Daniel and see if when they get time, maybe they can respond. So I just want to thank you both again for joining us. We really appreciate you taking the time to make these great presentations.
You're welcome. Pleasure. Feel free to contact me, folks. I'll throw some links in there if you have any questions, but happy to answer any questions offline if people reach out.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
You bet. Thank you both. And Christy, let's go to the next slide just take a moment to practice fracking, another resilience pause. Just a second. Notice the sensations in your body, just to allow what you just heard to sort of sink in a little bit by calming your nervous system, identifying pleasant, neutral sensations or unpleasant, and trying to deliberately shift your attention back to pleasant or neutral sensations and noticing whatever might occur in your body as you do that. Okay, go to the next slide, and let's now do some breakout rooms. These will be a little longer than the first ones we had today. And so go to the next slide. Again, just get together with 3 to 4 people and share what you just learned, what stood out from you from the two presenters, from Howard and Daniel. Discuss if if and how you might implement some version of this in your community, your neighborhood, your setting, and identify any key questions that emerge, and then we'll come back and have a discussion about that. So I'm not sure who's doing it, Christy or Daniel, Jesse, if you can open up the breakout rooms. We'll see you all in about, let's do it for 12 minutes this time.
Oops, I tossed Bob into a breakout room. I'm
I'll
so
join one of
sorry.
the, I'll
You'll-
join one of the rooms. I'll
You wanna
join
join?
the room too.
Okay, let me move you to room. Oh, there we go. How do I get Bob back? Does Bob want to be in a room? Does Bob know?
All right,
Okay,
Let me move him
everyone's
back.
here. Welcome back, everyone.
great. Welcome back. And Christy, you can go to the next slide. So let's just have a discussion now and about what you discussed in your breakout rooms, any questions that came up, and especially ideas about how you might be able to establish these kinds of programs, and especially how you can deliberately develop social connections, both strong and weak social connections in your community, and sustain them over time. So raise your hand or put a comment in chat, and Christy will just start to allow people to talk.
Let's see. Jessica raised their hand. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Or morning where I am, maybe afternoon for you all. But my partner, I'm not going to name names because I don't know, I don't want to share their story, but brought up a really good point that how do you do this community building, these block parties, et cetera, in neighborhoods that are really marked by violence, particularly gang violence, which, is a big issue over a lot of urban centers, right? And so I know there's been a lot of peace building work. That's not really my area of expertise, but if anyone has any experience in that, like how to build trust in communities that are really have a long-standing history of lack of trust and violence. You can't really just throw a block party, right? Would love to hear about it. Thank you.
Well, I can tell you what we do in San Francisco. So the truth is, in some of our neighborhoods, there are economic and social barriers to hosting block parties. And unfortunately, a lot of street activity happens that sometimes isn't positive, and it doesn't take more than one or two people to make things go sideways. And in communities with chronic, long histories of street violence, generally being out in the public realm for extended period of times can really cause anxiety and trauma to folks. And I was in a meeting on Friday with members of our African-American leadership, and they were sharing how bad it is in their community, where they literally celebrate when their children reach 18 years of age because they're not dead. And then everyone started crying in the room because that's pathetic, right? So what we do in the Bayview community is we partner with local organizations to host what we call NeighborFest Pluses, which are block parties for the whole neighborhood, which offer a high concentration of not only readiness work, that's a small piece of it, but just a ton of wraparound services from workforce development to health to games and entertainment and live music. So what we call the NeighborFest Plus. You can see it on the NeighborFest website. We host it in the Bayview, and it's like a massive resource fair, but with an emphasis on using the NeighborFest Plus organizing model to bring the CBOs together that we want to activate a hub with, and we use that as our organizing platform. So by asset mapping the neighborhood for all the organizations that might be able to come and participate in the event, we then pivot that list post-event and then board them into the hub and continue to work them on the community resilience work. So that's kind of like how we use the NeighborFest program in those neighborhoods. as an organizing platform, but also addressing the fact that there are some folks that just don't feel safe in the public space in front of their home.
Thank you, Daniel. Christy, hope that helps with the question. Christy, you want to see if there's other questions?
I'm not seeing any hands raised yet, but we'll give people a few
Comments
moments.
in chat.
Yeah. There are comments in chat, but no questions yet. Zan does say they're moving to a library shortly and hoping to be able to participate in community events and build off of library programming, which I think is, yeah, going into asset mapping. That's a great resource to get things like this started. Oh,
Let's
we
go,
have a
Jessica.
question. Yes. We have a question from Laura as well. How might we bring people across social divides? And this question can be to anyone who's here.
Daniel or Howard, are you still online? Not.
I can share like what our experience
okay.
was, if you want, in the pandemic,
Please do.
which was really interesting, was when we started convening all the hub leaders together from all the different neighborhoods. This is like, we have about 15 hubs set up in the city. One beautiful thing that happened was that the neighborhoods that would be considered vulnerable and the neighborhoods that were considered to be economically stable, what happened is they began to share best practices, and the neighborhoods that you thought were, had privilege and resources were learning a lot about how to help vulnerable residents because they never had to do it before from the communities that do it year round. So that was really cool. And then what was really neat was that the communities with resources began to fundraise and donate money to the hubs that needed resources to care for their residents. So this beautiful reciprocity started where people began to realize that everyone can learn from each other and also everyone can help each other. And so we had hub leaderships from neighborhoods that were economically rich, volunteering in communities and supporting vaccination sites. And what was really great was the unifying condition was just a collective love for people's neighborhoods, and people felt that. So we were really excited about to see how the hub networks could create that kind of cross cultural connectivity.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Daniel. And I can also just share from my own experience. I work with the Hearth, which is in Southern Oregon and Ashland area, and they do a lot of community events around storytelling. And we'll use storytelling as like a community tool to bring together issues and have space for these discussions that move past the political divide that people fall into. We also have a question from Midge as well. How do we address the issue of taking responsibility for initiating outreach? Could you, I'm so sorry to put you on the spot. Could you clarify your question, please?
Sure. COVID was great for us introverts, and sometimes it's hard for us to make that initial contact, even though we may know and like our neighbors. And I think it's kind of in some ways, it's kind of a trauma issue. And it's not just about the initiator, but also about the receiver and how not everybody has those social skills or responsivity that create that spontaneous moment where people can do what we're talking about. And sometimes it takes a fair amount of courage for people to reach out or to receive an invitation. And I was just wondering if we could kind of shine a little bit of light on that part of it.
Well, I mean, you're speaking to one of the big challenges here in San Francisco, which is, we have 135,000 seniors and people with access and functional needs in the city right now. By 2030, we'll be at 250,000. That's almost like 1/3 of San Franciscans, and 30% of that population live alone. And we all know how living alone over time does decrease people's capacity to be socially connected and build new relationships. And so that's one of the reasons why we pursued the block party model because we felt it was the easiest, less intentional way for people to connect and meet their neighbors. If all they simply have to do is walk out of their house and say hello, as opposed to go to a meeting and be caught up in more of a structured onboarding process. So that's one of the reasons why we pursue that model. We also encourage the deployment of programs like the Community Connectors program, which are hyper-local senior programming activities, which reach out aggressively to seniors that live alone and get them to onboard and plug into these networks so they can meet other seniors and begin to reverse some of the behaviors that have been generated from their isolation. And so it's a problem across this country. The U.S. Surgeon General's reached out and asked about our work in this area because people that are not connected ultimately experience much more harm and trauma during times of stress. And that was proven quantitatively and qualitatively in Tohoku, Japan by Dr. Aldrich. Was what saved people's lives in the tsunami wasn't the seawall, it was their connectivity to their immediate neighbors. And so in a city like San Francisco, where we have like 70% of our population turns over every 20 years, it's hard to establish those networks and sustain them. So that's why we're using block parties to activate them, because we've got to be more intentional.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. Midge, do you feel that answers your question?
Yes, that was lovely. Thank you, Daniel. I guess my mind is reaching out to think, how do we connect this to trauma itself? I think there may be more psychological nuance in this moment of interconnection than we might be giving it credit for. As Daniel was saying, that when you're helping somebody move out of the sense of their own isolation, I think that is a triggering moment. And so we might want to think about what kinds of things are a salve to that moment that is like, how do you approach that? When you do crisis work, there are things you say and things you don't say. And this moment of contact may have some of that in it about how you represent yourself, for one thing. I mean, I can't go represent myself as the party person because that gives people in my neighborhood the wrong idea. And, but every neighborhood, regardless of its socioeconomic status, has people in it who have or are experiencing different kinds of stress and trauma. And I'm wondering, for me, that knowledge always bolsters my courage. And so how can we look at this connecting moment as a way to kind of be in a trauma informed state?
Midge, I think your question goes well with Megan and Vivian. I do see your hand raised, but I feel like we could connect these questions together. Do folks?
We only have one more minute. Christy, we only have one more minute. So let's...
Okay. Megan, maybe I will direct your question to the base camp. Megan is asking for resource lists. If anyone here in this group has resources directed to Midge's question and community engagement actions they have felt have been helpful and trauma informed, if you could send them to me or post them directly on base camp, that would be lovely. And I'll turn it back to you, Bob.
Great, and I wish we had, even in the breakout rooms where Christy and I and Neely were talking, I wish we had all day for this kind of conversation and really dive into the details, but we don't. But we're going to go into more detail about how you help people deal with these kinds of issues as we go through the rest of the community practice, especially the healing session, the very last session. I think we'll get to some of the questions that we just heard now. So, I wish we had more time to go into it now, but we don't. So, Christy, can you go to the last two slides? Well, again, Daniel, thank you very much for your presentation and for sharing and staying with us on the question and answer and all the work you're doing. And I just like everyone to think about how you can engage in these kind of activities in some way in your community, in your neighborhood, whatever your setting is. And to always remember that if trauma can be passed down through generations, then so can healing and transformational resilience. This is our mission, which is very different than just thinking we're going to treat people who are traumatized. We've got to prevent it by building resilience. And that's really got to be our focus, especially as, and Daniel said this well, as the climate emergency just gets worse and worse, and it is going to. So, but there are methods, there are skills, there are ways to address these issues. So let's go to the last slide. So I want to thank you all for joining us today. Please remember to complete the session evaluation that I don't know if it's been posted in chat yet, but it will, and we'll send it to you afterwards. Also, some homework suggestions, practice tracking resilience pause once a day, and just try to share it or teach it to somebody else, and to share what you learned today from Howard and Daniel with a couple of other people and discuss how it could be applied in your community, your organization, or your setting. There's not going to be an open session this week. There's not enough interest in that, not sufficient interest. It's, I think, the time and day this thing work out. But next session, we're going to, next week on the 15th, we're going to focus in on making a just transition. And that is also a place where we build social connections by building healthy and just and equitable climate resilient physical, built, economic, and ecological conditions. Jackie Patterson's going to join us. She's the founder and executive director of the His Home Legacy Project and former director of the NAACP Climate and Health Program and Social Justice Program, I think it was. And Violet Wolf Sienna, the executive director of Climate Resilient Communities, is going to join us also to talk about her program, which is in the southern part of the peninsula in San Francisco, southern peninsula of San Francisco, how she's helping low-income residents and mostly people of color address the physical built environmental issues related to climate change. So look forward to next session. Please post questions, resources, et cetera, in chat or send them to Christy or I immediately. And with that, I look forward to seeing you all next week. I wish you all a very, very good week. Thank you all and take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Brandon.